There's been such a tremendous evolution in the trucking industry over the last 30 years, going back to deregulation. And I think it's important that we always remember the history of the trucking industry. Obviously, when we had a regulatory framework, which we may end up with some re-regulation, things were a lot different. Here in Southern California, there was about 175 employers that were under contract. There's really only two entities here that were LTL that were of any significance that weren't union. One was GI, and the other one was Pro Trucking. And it's very much changed. And what's happened now with this economic crunch that we're going through, a lot of the carriers are having a very, very hard time. And it's not just the ones you hear about, but it's a lot of other ones. And I saw in the news that SAIA just had to do a deal, to keep afloat. And the most publicized deal is probably what's going on with YRCW. And that's most publicized because that's the largest LTL entity. And I want to just go over a little bit of history of LTL, specifically as it applies to YRCW, because it's important to understand how they got into the problem that they're in. And we're very confident that they're going to survive. But the reason that they got into trouble didn't really have much to do with the workers, with the truck drivers, with the dock workers, with the clericals, or any of those folks. What it had to do with is the over-leveraging by the management and the owners of Yellow Freight. By that I'm talking about specifically how they went and purchased roadway, and they went into big debt and they purchased roadway. And then after they purchased roadway, they went ahead and purchased USF. And in this process, they accumulated a lot of debt. And as the economic meltdown came forward and freight dropped off, freight volume dropped off, as well as the tariff or the costing of the freight, they got put in a major squeeze. And the banks wouldn't help them. So they came to their workers. The workers voted to take a 10% cut on their wages to keep the company alive. And we're talking about 45,000 unionized jobs. And with pensions and health and welfare running to the tune of probably, between pensions and health and welfare, probably $12 an hour. Just on pensions and health and welfare, not counting what the hourly wage is. And so we have a large workforce of 45,000 workers and their families depending on YRCW. And then we have another large force of inactives, of retirees that are getting not just their pensions, but their insurance from the health and welfare funds that YRCW participated in. So it wasn't rocket science for our members to understand that we're going to keep this company alive. Because you can imagine what would happen if we had a situation where the largest trucking company in the LTL went out of business and 45,000 people and their families got kicked to the curb, plus the retirees. This isn't just going to be a negative for the Teamsters Union, it's going to be a negative for the entire trucking industry. Because we've seen time and time again that the union employers really only do the right thing because the union forces them to. And the non-union employers may or may not do the right thing, but often they don't, and don't really give a hoot about the impact on their employees. And I know there's a lot of FedEx freight people in here, and I'm not going to get into a whole big thing on bashing FedEx Freight, because you work there, you understand what they're doing, you see how they're cannibalizing their line operations, you see how they're basically pushing the line drivers into classifications and into work or no work in areas that they had really no interest in being. If people wanted to be a dockman, they'd become a dockman. If they're a truck driver, they want to be a truck driver. And so we've seen this squeeze go forward, and we've seen how, unfortunately, Mr. Smith and the other people at FedEx have not taken care of their people, and specifically, one of the most glaring things that pops up is the fact that there's no benefits, let alone much consideration for the part-time workers. You can work over there for years and years and get no health insurance. And what's that message? What is that message? And then you throw that on top of the arrogance of this corporation in terms of telling the U.S. Congress that if they dare to reclassify the FedEx ground people and put them under the NLRA instead of the Railway Labor Act, that they're not going to purchase Boeing aircraft, right? Well, what's the message then? I mean, there's an external message that's very, very negative. And then there's an internal message to the working people at FedEx, and I'm not talking just about the people at FedEx Freight, but throughout FedEx, that, you know what you do is not of much value to us. We really want you like from the neck down, and we don't really want you to think about what's going on, and we don't want you to have the same rights that other people have. And I think that the time is coming where Mr. Smith is going to have to face a recognition of his workers and have to sit down and bargain. And I can tell you the Teamsters Union is putting resource into this, and we're looking to amp up a campaign with FedEx Freight here in the West in particular. And I think that we will be successful because of the quality of the people that are interested in making a change at FedEx, as well as because of the external forces that are taking place in the economy. And by that I mean, when you look around and you see, in my neighborhood, I live in Costa Mesa, and my wife and I walked around the other day, and it's just amazing the amount of vacancies in this residential neighborhood. And a lot of those are foreclosures. A lot of them are foreclosures. And what's happened in our neighborhood is similar to what's happened in your neighborhoods, where the housing values have collapsed and gone down from anywhere from like 25% to maybe 50 or 60%. And a lot of people are upside down on their mortgages, and they're vacating their houses, and you throw in a very weak, struggling economy right now with a lot of unemployment. And on top of that, you take the loss in people's 401ks, where people had $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 in their 401k or their IRA, and they were looking to use that as a cushion when they retired, and that has reduced. I know mine, fortunately I have a pension. Actually, I have a couple of pensions. But the fact is, if I have a pension, I'm not completely dependent on Social Security. And my IRA, which was invested in pretty high caps, which are high-risk stocks, you know, when I got my report last year, it had gone down 34%. And like I said, I'm not just dependent on that. But I know that there's a heck of a lot of workers out here that are dependent on what happens with the stock market, because a lot of their pension pieces are tied up with what happens in the stock market. And so you've got those sort of issues where people, particularly people that are in their 40s or 50s, or maybe a little older, they're coming up on their golden years, and they're looking to see, well, what's my pension situation? Gee, my house is worth like half of what it was, and my 401k is worth maybe 2/3 of what it was. Am I going to have enough money at the end of the day to live in the way I want to live? Now, on top of that, because the Teamsters Union represents a lot of people that do difficult work, and you folks are part of that quotient, even though you're not represented, a lot of people that are in the trucking industry, it's very difficult for them to work until they're 65.